Hi guys, I'm Moldran, and as I promised you on Twitch, I made a video with some tests about the Whirlwind Barbarian. For example, first I'm gonna compare the sprint tornado damage to the whirlwind damage to see how important whirlwind damage is. Secondly, I'm gonna compare or take a look at the offhand DPS. Is it worth to invest many millions just to get higher DPS in your offhand, or is it really just about the stats? And last but not least, I'm gonna take a short look on life on hit versus lifesteal for my given DPS. I mean, sure, up to a certain DPS level, for example, let's say up to 70k DPS, life on hit is gonna be better, obviously, but I'm gonna test for higher DPS for my own DPS if there's actually a point where lifesteal is better than life on hit, or if life on hit is still a better choice. So let's get started with test number 1. So this is my gear choice for the first test. I don't need to change any weapons. The only thing that I'm gonna change is one time I'm using sprint and whirlwind, and one time I'm only using sprint. So I'm gonna take a look on whirlwind, how important it is, how much it contributes to the entire spec DPS. And here you can see on the top, with using whirlwind, and on the bottom I'm only using sprint tornadoes. And yeah, I did every test with at least 5 tries, and I always took the average value of it to eliminate RNG. Like, sure, there's still a small room of error in my tests, but they show like everything pretty nice. Like here you can see I almost killed him in the same time by using tornadoes, which is pretty insane. With using whirlwind, I was only able to kill him 13% faster, and 13% is not that much, so definitely the main damage with this spec or build comes from the tornadoes. And I even had a high DPS offhand, which affects whirlwind but doesn't affect tornadoes. But still, even the high DPS offhand didn't help me much, only 13%. And the second test is about offhand DPS. Does it matter, the offhand DPS? Some people say it's important, some say it's completely irrelevant, so I decided to test it. And for this test, I'm using my own weapon, which has 157% crit damage and 870 DPS, and I'm gonna compare it with this weapon, which has 1% more crit hit damage and 600 less DPS. So if you actually look at the details, from 420% crit damage, I go to 421% crit damage, but I lose 30k DPS. So that's an interesting test, and let's do it. So on top we have my normal DPS weapon, and on the bottom we have the 200 DPS weapon, but the same stats. And as you can see soon, I'm actually killing him slower with, like every try that I did in the 5 tries, I killed him slower with the lower DPS weapon. And on average, it was exactly like in this clip, around 10% slower. So what this means is that the offhand DPS actually matters to some extent. Now when you take into consideration that whirlwind only accounts for around 13% of your damage, at least, and that's all single target. Like it could be different in multi-target, but it should be around the same. But yeah, whirlwind is only 13% of your single target DPS. The offhand DPS doesn't matter that much. But like in this clip, I completely gimped my offhand DPS. Like I didn't have like 600 or 700 DPS, but 200 DPS. And that like makes my whirlwind considerably worse, because I also lose 30k DPS on the sheet. And additionally, the auto attacks like the bash that you use to generate rage is affected by it as well, and that just adds up to around 10% DPS loss if you like go with a completely bad offhand. So what I mean with to some extent is you wanna set a minimum DPS for the offhand. Like for myself, I'd say around 600 or 650 DPS is the minimum DPS your offhand should have. And after that, like you should really give the focus to stats. For example, if you have a 600 DPS dagger with like really great stats, life on hit, socket, crit damage, and then you have a 900 DPS weapon, maybe a slower weapon, for example a X and with less crit damage, then you should probably get the 600 DPS offhand, because DPS on the offhand doesn't matter that much, but it's also not completely worthless, so you still want to get some minimum DPS on the offhand. As I said, in my opinion, around 600 or 700 is the sweet spot. You don't want to get a 200 DPS offhand, even with great stats, because Whirlwind gets a considerable DPS loss, and so does Bash. Alright, the third test is lifesteal versus life on hit. And I purchased 2 very good weapons for this test, so now I can really compare it. I'm taking off all my life on hit, and there we go. So those are the 2 weapons, and as you can see here, the difference in damage is only 400, which is less than 1%. So the difference in the damage is they're like completely identical. It's 3 DPS on the dagger, and yeah. So what I'm doing is I'm comparing 3% lifesteal versus 840 life on hit. So many people are often asking me, should I get an offhand with 3% lifesteal or one with 700 or 800 life on hit? And I always recommended the life on hit. So I'm gonna do this test now with around 45k DPS. And just like the previous tests, I did this test 5 times to see a difference. Now Esmeralda, if you look at it, probably wasn't the best, because there is no constant damage and there is health globes dropping that you pick up sometimes, but in the test with the life on hit, I killed him 5 times out of 5 times, and with the lifesteal I died 4 times. With the lifesteal it was like really hard to get the life back when I took damage, and the win of this was clearly the life on hit. So at 50k DPS, life on hit was 800 life on hit was superior to 3% lifesteal. And yeah, then I was thinking like, what can I do to improve this? I simply boosted my DPS for lifesteal, because lifesteal gets better the higher your DPS gets. So now I'm trying to boost my DPS a bit and compare it then. So what I did was I bought 2 glass cannon items, which only boost my DPS but nothing else. And I'm also gonna put a crit gem in the offhand, and some DPS gems in the legs. And now I got 80k DPS unbuffed. And let's see what 3% lifesteal, like I'm still at the 3% lifesteal with no life on hit. Let's see if we can do better now. Because the thing with lifesteal is it gets better the higher your DPS gets. Like before I was struggling a lot, I was dying, I couldn't kill him like I could have if I would have picked up the health group, but I just wanted to show the difference between life on hit and lifesteal at 50k DPS. And life on hit was a big winner. But let's see now what happens with 3% lifesteal and 80k DPS unbuffed. That felt much better, Like 3% lifesteal are much better at 80k DPS than at 50k DPS. So now when it comes down to the question life on hit versus lifesteal, my recommendations are still the same. I always recommend to get at least 1k life on hit with the tornado build, and lifesteal is optional. Sure, as you know, lifesteal gets more effective the more you have, and I always think that a great slot to get lifesteal is the belt. Like get a Barbarian belt, sacrifice a bit of strength or vitality, and there you got an easy 2.5 to 3% lifesteal. Because the stats, they don't exclude each other. Like lifesteal is great if you have high DPS, like let's say 60k plus. Even at 50k I already noticed the difference, but it wasn't like up to the levels of life on hit, of comparable amounts of life on hit. And yeah, as I said, I'm gonna summarize it again. Get at least 1k life on hit, try to get lifesteal on your belt, and then you're set. Life on hit you can get on the offhand, that's usually the best place. You can even get it on the main hand if you find a nice axe, if you suck at crit damage and life on hit for example, and definitely on the amulet. You can also get life on hit on rings, but just like all stats of rings, only in small amounts. So yeah, that's my recommendation on this. I also want to show you a nice spreadsheet that explains life on hit pretty well. Yeah, it's basically this spreadsheet that shows the Barbarian life on hit skill distribution, because every skill got a different ratio on life on hit. For example, Frenzy, for Frenzy you attack faster, so they scaled down the Frenzy life on hit to 75%. Bash on the other hand, with most runes, gives you 100%. And yeah, then of course also spells like Cleave or Rend get down because of the life on hit. Also Leap, because with Leap you can hit multiple targets. And of course Whirlwind, which only gets 13% life on hit. And also the Tornadoes, where do we have it, gets scaled down to 20% life on hit. But now what this tells me is that Whirlwind in single target with life on hit is actually scaled down. So it's still surprising to me why I was doing so well with life on hit compared to Lifesteal, which only receives the Inferno nerf. But yeah, that's just what I wanted to show you. I'm gonna link this in the video. I hope you enjoyed this video and see you guys next time.